Lonely kid walked home crying, his backpack dragging behind him as tears blurred the cracked sidewalk. Cars passed, windows closed, no one noticed, or pretended not to. He wiped his face, believing he was completely alone. Then the quiet street began to tremble. A low rumble rose from behind him, then from ahead. Within minutes, dozens of bikes rolled in from every direction, forming a protective wall around the boy, their engines idling like a promise that he would never walk alone again. The gray sky hung heavy that October afternoon, casting shadows across the empty street like a blanket of sorrow. Through the drizzle, a small figure emerged, shoulders hunched, backpack dragging against the wet pavement with each defeated step. His name was Illy, and at 12 years old, he had already learned that some days feel like they might never end. The rain mixed with tears on his cheeks, creating tiny rivers that traced the contours of his young face. His sneakers, worn thin at the soles, splashed through puddles that reflected the overcast world above. Each step seemed heavier than the last, as if the weight of his humiliation was pulling him down toward the earth. His backpack, with its broken strap held together by safety pins, told a story of poverty that made him an easy target. But there was something else in the air that afternoon, something he couldn't sense yet. Someone was watching, someone who had seen enough injustice for one lifetime, someone who wouldn't let this slide. The rumble was still distant, but it was coming. Justice, it seemed, sometimes arrives on two wheels when you least expect it. Earlier that morning, Illy had walked through the halls of Jefferson Middle School like a ghost. At barely 5 feet tall, and weighing maybe 90 pounds soaking wet, he moved through crowds of students who barely acknowledged his existence. His clothes, hand-me-downs from older cousins, hung loose on his thin frame. The jacket he wore, a faded green windbreaker with a torn pocket, had been his father's, back when his father was still around. In third period math, when Mrs. Henderson asked students to share their weekend plans, Illy had nothing to say. While other kids talked about family trips and birthday parties, he stared at his desk, tracing invisible patterns with his finger. At lunch, he sat alone in the corner of the cafeteria, slowly eating a peanut butter sand, which his grandmother had packed in a reused paper bag. The other kids laughed and threw food, their voices echoing off the walls like thunder, but none of that laughter was meant for him, only at him. It was during gym class that things took their usual turn for the worse. When teams were chosen for basketball, Illy was picked last, as always. When he missed a shot, snickers rippled through the gymnasium. "Nice try, stick boy," someone called out, and the nickname stuck like glue. By the time the final bell rang, Illy's spirit had been worn down to almost nothing. He gathered his books slowly, hoping the hallways would empty before he had to face the walk to his locker. But hope, he was learning, was a luxury he couldn't afford. The moment Illy stepped outside Jefferson Middle School, he knew they were waiting. Tyler Morrison and his crew 3/8, graders who had made tormenting smaller kids into an art form. They leaned against the brick fence like vultures, their eyes locked on their favorite prey. Tyler, tall for his age with a cruel smile that never reached his eyes, pushed off from the wall as Illy tried to slip past unnoticed. "Well, well, look who's trying to sneak away," Tyler called out, his voice carrying that particular brand of confidence that comes from knowing you have backup. His friends, Jake and Marcus, flanked him like bodyguards, their laughter sharp and cutting. "Were you going so fast, stick boy? Got somewhere important to be?" Illy kept his head down, walking faster, but the bullies matched his pace easily. When Tyler reached out and knocked the books from Illy's arms, they scattered across the sidewalk like fallen leaves. Papers fluttered in the wind, homework assignments that had taken hours to complete now mixing with puddle water and dirt. "Oops," Tyler said with mock concern. "Looks like you dropped something." As Illy knelt to gather his scattered belongings, Jake stepped forward and deliberately kicked his backpack, sending it skidding across the concrete. The already damaged strap finally gave way completely, spilling the contents: a broken calculator, worn pencils, a thermos that had seen better days. Passers-by glanced over but kept walking, their eyes averted, their pace quickening. In that moment, the cruelest truth revealed itself. The world was full of people who would rather look away than get involved. Illy's tears came then, hot and unstoppable, as he crawled across the pavement trying to salvage what remained of his dignity. But something was building in the distance. a low rumble that started as barely a whisper but grew steadily stronger. At first, it blended with the sound of traffic, just another part of the city's soundtrack. The bullies didn't notice it, too busy enjoying their moment of power. Tyler was in the middle of another cruel joke when the sound became impossible to ignore. It started as a vibration felt more than heard, traveling up through the soles of their feet and into their bones. Then came the unmistakable thunder of motorcycle engines, not just one or two, but dozens. The rumble grew louder, more purposeful, like rolling thunder that refused to pass. Even the bullies stopped laughing, their heads turning toward the sound with growing unease. Around the corner they came, a wall of chrome and steel, leather and determination. The motorcycle club's patches read Road Warriors, but these weren't weekend riders out for a scenic cruise. These were men and women who had served their country, worked hard jobs, raised families, and somewhere along the way had learned that strength without purpose was just noise. Leading them was Ranger real name Robert Martinez, a 52-year-old former Marine whose weathered face told stories of tours overseas and battles fought both abroad and at home. The formation was precise, almost military in its execution. As they approached the scene, engines roaring in harmony, the lead bike slowed, then the next, until dozens of motorcycles formed a semi-circle around the small group. The sound was overwhelming, a wall of thunder that seemed to shake the very air. Then, as if controlled by a single mind, the engines quieted to a rumbling idle, and the sudden relative silence felt louder than the roar that had preceded it. Ranger dismounted first, his boots hitting the pavement with purpose. He was a big man, not just in stature but in presence, the kind of person who commanded respect without having to demand it. His leather vest bore patches that told a story: military service, motorcycle clubs, charity rides. Behind him, other riders dismounted in sequence, forming a human wall of solidarity. There were men and women, young and old, united by something deeper than their love of motorcycles. Tyler and his friends had gone pale, their earlier bravado evaporating like morning mist. These weren't the kind of people you messed with, not because they were looking for trouble, but because they had already found enough of it in their lives to know when to step in. Ranger walked slowly toward where Elise still knelt among his scattered belongings, his movements deliberate and calm. Without a word, he bent down, picked up the fallen bicycle, and examined the bent wheel with the practiced eye of someone who understood that small damages could be fixed. "You okay, son?" Ranger's voice was gruff but gentle, weathered by years but softened by genuine concern. Behind him, the other bikers stood in formation, their arms crossed, their eyes fixed on the bullies, who suddenly found themselves very much outnumbered. The message was clear, without a single threat being spoken: you picked on the wrong kid today. What happened next would become the stuff of legend in that neighborhood. The bikers didn't need to raise their voices or make threats. Their presence alone was enough to send Tyler and his crew scrambling backward, mumbling apologies and excuses as they retreated toward the school. But the Road Warriors weren't done, not even close. "Nobody walks alone," Ranger said simply, helping Illy to his feet. "Not on our watch." With careful hands, he helped gather the scattered papers, straightening each one before placing it back in Illy's broken backpack. Another biker, a woman with kind eyes and calloused hands, produced a roll of duct tape and quickly repaired the torn strap. It wasn't pretty, but it would hold. The formation that followed was something the neighborhood had never seen before and likely never would again. Dozens of motorcycles, engines purring like giant mechanical cats, escorted one small boy on a bent bicycle down the street toward home. Illy rode in the center of the formation, protected on all sides by chrome and steel, leather and loyalty. The sound of the engines created a symphony of solidarity that echoed off houses and car windows, drawing neighbors to their front porches and children to their bedroom windows. As they moved down the street, something magical happened. The rhythm of the engines seemed to match the beating of Illy's heart, which for the first time in months wasn't racing with fear, but swelling with something he had almost forgotten existed: pride. These strangers, these warriors of the road, had seen his pain and decided it mattered. They had turned his moment of deepest humiliation into a parade of protection. his tears of shame into tears of overwhelming gratitude. When they reached Illy's modest house, a small ranch with peeling paint and a yard that needed attention, the motorcycles formed a perfect circle in the street. Ranger dismounted once more and walked Illy to his front door, where his grandmother appeared, her weathered face a mixture of concern and amazement. The old woman had heard the rumble from blocks away and had feared the worst, but seeing her grandson's face, stained but smiling, she understood immediately that something miraculous had occurred. "Ma'am," Ranger said, removing his helmet and revealing gray hair and kind eyes, "your grandson here had a rough day. We just wanted to make sure he got home safe." From his vest pocket, he produced a small patch, the Road Warriors logo, embroidered in silver thread on black fabric. Kneeling down to Illy's eye level, he pressed the patch into the boy's palm. "Brotherhood isn't about bikes, son," Ranger said, his voice carrying the weight of hard-earned wisdom. "It's about standing up for someone who can't stand up for themselves. You pin this to your backpack, and you remember, you're never alone. There are people in this world who will fight for what's right, even for someone they've never met before." He stood and saluted, a gesture of respect from one human being to another. "You've got more courage than those bullies will ever have. Walking home with your head up after what they did, that's what real strength looks like." Behind him, 23 other bikers raised their hands to their foreheads in solidarity, a wall of respect for a 12-year-old boy who had taught them something about resilience. Then, as precisely as they had arrived, they mounted their bikes and rode off into the sunset, their engines fading to a distant rumble, then to nothing at all, leaving only the memory of thunder and the promise that kindness still existed in the world. The next morning, Illy walked through the halls of Jefferson Middle School with his head held a little higher. The Road Warriors patch was pinned prominently to his repaired backpack, and though the bullies still whispered and pointed, their words had lost their power. Tyler Morrison avoided eye contact, and his crew found other things to occupy their time. Word had spread quickly about the motorcycle escort, and suddenly Illy wasn't invisible anymore. He was the kid who had his own biker gang, the boy who had been chosen for protection by warriors of the road. Maybe we can't all ride in with engines roaring and chrome gleaming, but each of us has the power to be someone's wall of protection. We can choose to be the person who stops walking when they see injustice, who kneels down to help gather scattered papers, who stands up for the kid who can't stand up for themselves. The Road Warriors understood something that the world often forgets. Strength isn't measured in size or numbers, but in the willingness to use whatever power you have to protect those who need it most. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to remember that brotherhood is still alive. Let kindness ride further than hate ever could. Hit that like button if you believe in standing up for what's right, and subscribe for more stories that prove heroes still walk among us. Sometimes they just happen to ride motorcycles. Tell us in the comments about a time someone stood up for you, or when you chose to be someone's hero. Because in the end, we're all just walking each other home.